Hello, dear students. I'm Swati Singh Parmar, Assistant Professor, Dharmashastra National Law University, Jabalpur. And today in our lecture, we'll discuss about the United Nations. Previously, we've discussed about international law, generally, its nature, meaning, kinds, etc. We've also looked into subjects of international law, sources of international law. Now we will read the United Nations in our today's recording. And we're reading about the United Nations today because out of all other international law organizations, the United Nations is one of the most prominent, popular, and widely celebrated. And it is rightly so because of its extent of operations, functions, and its stature in international legal society. Which is why in international law section, if you expect a question on international organizations, in all probabilities, it would be from the United Nations or any of its organs. So we'll discuss about the United Nations briefly for the purposes of CLAT UG entrance exam. So let us begin. Now, in our today's discussion, we will first introduce the United Nations. Then we will keep it into the brief history of the organization. Then we'll see the structure through an organogram of the United Nations. Then we'll look at certain questions based on a small passage. And then I'll conclude with final tips and takeaways for all of you. So, if we talk about brief history of United Nations, which is significant to know for all of us, to understand how gradually United Nations as an organization evolved on the world map and what stature it enjoys today. So we'll try to look at the history. I said that we'll look at the brief history. So we'll try to fast forward most of the events of history and directly jump to the prominent events which are seen as the pillars of creating United Nations. The story starts with first very significant event of world history, which is the First World War. And never in the history of humankind, the world had seen such large-scale violations of human rights, such huge number of people dying, and the bloodshed was shocking. Now, at the end of World War IV, it was realized that there has to be some order in the international society. And as we know, that law is an instrument of instilling order in any society, and same goes for international society. So therefore, an outcome of World War I was a treaty where the states of the world sat and discussed, negotiated about peace that concluded World War I. So World War I was concluded by way of a peace treaty, which also is known as Treaty of Versailles. It is known as Treaty of Versailles because the treaty was negotiated and debated upon in the Palace of Versailles. So the place Versailles gives its name to the treaty, and that is why the Treaty of Versailles here double LES is silent, so it is pronounced as Versailles, not Versailles. So this is Treaty of Versailles, and this dates back to 1919, the year 1919. Now, the Treaty of Versailles talked about not only about restoring peace momentarily, that is just after World War I, but also it thought of imagining some solution to have peace even beyond this World War I period. And with that in mind, there was a document that was drafted, the document we commonly call as Covenant of League of Nations. And this document is the constitution. That is, the document is a document that establishes the first formal public international law organization in the world, which is the League of Nations. The League of Nations was established by the document Covenant of League of Nations. The Covenant of League of Nations can be understood as the Constitution of League of Nations. And then the League of Nations was established in the next year, that is 1920. Now, League of Nations is a very significant step in international legal society. Why so? Because, as I said, that it was the first formal public international law institution, right? So in our previous discussions, we have discussed about public international law and private international law dichotomy. So we know the difference between public and private international law. So in that sense, if we talk about public international law, it is the first formal organization of public international law. So a world which was not accustomed of having an international organization, the states of the world which were not habituated of having something above them, of having some international organization, they, for the first time, they paved way, they made their minds ready for existence of an international organization. And in that sense, I say that League of Nations was a significant a leap in international legal history. So all this is post World War I developments. But then the world witnessed the Second World War, World War II. And World War II brought this sensibility that League of Nations has in a way failed. So there were many speculations on the functioning of League of Nations, the structure of League of Nations, the participation of world states in League of Nations. And this led to a lot of scholars from international law, international politics, and beyond to conclude that, oh, see, the League of Nations has failed because League of Nations was established with this in mind that international legal society will have some sense of order and there'll be some peace in international society. But League of Nations could not perform its responsibility. And with that myopic lens, many scholars concluded that League of Nations failed. And in some sense, this was true also. But then League of Nations was functioning at a time where the international law community was not ready for an international organization. It was functioning with limited moral support, limited political support, and limited funds. And also with states which were not accustomed of how international organization functions, how we obey what international law organization decides, or whether international law organization has a power to decide and tell the states what to do. So all these were very surprising, new, alien questions to the world society. And if we take into account these contexts, the historical, political, and economic context in which League of Nations operated, then we might not conclude that League of Nations actually failed. But then the summary here is that post-World War era saw that League of Nations failed in performing its duty of having peace or of taking such measures where there is some sense of order in international society. And then there was this need that League of Nations has to be rethought. There are flaws in the Covenant of League of Nations in terms of the power, functions, in terms of banning the idea of war, conditional ban on war. So there's several flaws in the structure of League of Nations, in the powers and duties that are given to League of Nations in the Covenant, and in other operational and functional aspects of League of Nations. And with this in mind, it was the the post Second World War era that thought that there has to be a different international organization, more well thought of, which has an extensive constitution of its own, which has larger political participation, political support, an extensive economic, social, cultural unit that can actually uh, restore and sustain international peace and order. One which is built on the foregrounds and backgrounds of League of Nations, because League of Nations was the first of its kind. So, United Nations, this was the idea that an international organization has to be there, came. And this United Nations, in that sense, is also termed as the successor of the League of Nations. The League of Nations is the predecessor of the United Nations. It was the San Francisco Conference where this idea of having a new international organization was first conceived. And with this conception, there was the Constitution of United Nations, which is officially known as the Charter of the United Nations, was drafted, finalized, and this charter led to establishment of the United Nations in the year 1945. Now, as I said, this is a very brief history of the establishment of United Nations, but it is, in my opinion, it will suffice for our CLAT preparation. So while understanding how international law operates and how United Nations as an agency helps in operation of international law, we have to keep all of this in mind, that how it evolved. And this will give us clues in understanding the concepts that we have read or we will read in international law portion. So now let us see the United Nations in detail. So United Nations is an international law organization, that has 193 plus member states. When I use the word member states, I mean the states of the world. So the states of the world which become member of an organization are referred to as member states. So United Nations has 193 plus member states as of now. And if we talk about the structure of United Nations, it has several organs which can be classified into chief organs, subsidiary organs, funds, chapters, etc. So today we will just look at the chief organs of the United Nations, which are 6 in number. So the first chief organ is the General Assembly, which we call as GA or UNGA, United Nations General Assembly in its abbreviated form. The second chief organ is the Security Council, which we call as the SC or UNSC, United Nations Security Council in short. Third is the Economic and Social Council, which is known as ECOSOC in short. Fourth is the Secretariat. Then is the International Court of Justice, which is also known as ICJ in short. And the sixth one is the Trusteeship Council, TC in short. So let us see in brief what are the functioning of these chief organs of the United Nations. So as I said that there are only 6 chief organs, and within these chief organs there are subsidiary organs which are part of this chief organs, right? So all other subsidiary organs or funds or chapters of United Nations, the entire United Nations framework, those are parts of either of these chief organs, right? So this is the simplest organogram of the United Nations, and I would highly recommend the students to go to the official website of the United Nations and check out the detailed organogram of it, which has a mention of subsidiary organs, chapters, funds, and temporary committees and permanent committees within these chief organs. So let us now see the brief functioning of each of these organs and what do they do. So General Assembly is the main deliberative body of United Nations that is engaged in policy making. It is also a representative body. When I say representative body, that means that all the member states which are members of the United Nations, they have their representatives in General Assembly. So General Assembly has 193 representatives from each member state of the United Nations. Each member state is not represented in each of the chief organs. It is only the General Assembly which has representation of all the 193 member states of the United Nations, which is why General Assembly is known as a representative assembly. It is deliberative body because it deliberates upon matters. It is also a policy making body of United Nations because it makes the policies. So General Assembly is known as a deliberative, policy making and representative body. This is the only universal representative body. This means that all the members have their representatives here, as I just said. Right? Now, let us see what is Security Council. So, Security Council is more of an executory body of United Nations. It performs executive functions. Its main objective or principal objective is the maintenance of international peace and security. That would mean that whenever there is an incident or an event which may cause threat to international peace and security, in that case, the Security Council will step in and try to do something. Now, what is that something? We'll talk about this. It may try to deliberate upon the issue, it may try to give guidelines, policies, etc., to address that event so that there is no threat to international peace and security. As of now, we need to understand that the Security Council's main function is maintenance of peace and security. As I said, that General Assembly is representative, so it has representatives from all 193 member states. Unlike Security Council, so Security Council does not have all 193 member states representation. Security Council has just 15 members. And this 15 members can be broken down into 5 plus 10. 10. 5. So Security Council has 5 permanent members. These permanent members are the ones which are mentioned in the Charter of the United Nations itself. So United Nations Charter mentions that these 5 states are the permanent states of the Security Council, permanent members of Security Council, and this permanent membership does not change. So those 5 states remain member of Security Council unless this United Nations Charter is changed or amended, right? Coincidentally, and not coincidentally, but these 5 permanent member states are the ones which are the victorious powers of World War II. Because when we discussed the brief history of United Nations, I said that after World War II, during the San Francisco Conference, the United Nations was conceived and deliberated upon. So the upper hand during the deliberations of the United Nations and the drafting of the Charter of United Nations was with the victorious powers of World War II. And therefore, the World War II's victorious powers are those five states which have made themselves as the permanent five members of Security Council. And Security Council is the prominent uh, body of United Nations in terms of taking decisions in cases of international uh, peace and security maintenance. And then, besides this five permanent membership, there are 10 non permanent members. That means there are 10 states which are not the permanent members. So non permanent members are elected to be the member of Security Council. And once their term is complete, there are another set of 10, another set of some non-permanent members which are elected to be the members of Security Council. So this 10 keeps on changing, but the five states which are the permanent members are permanent because it is mentioned in the charter, so they don't change in that sense. Now let us move to Economic and Social Council. It is the main body responsible for coordination, policy review, and dialogue in the United Nations. The Secretariat, as the name suggests, it is basically the office, the back-end office of the United Nations, which comprises of the Secretary General and the United Nations staff members. It basically looks into the day-to-day activities of the United Nations and provides assistance in terms of staff and secretarial assistance. Now, fifth chief organ, a very significant one, is the International Court of Justice. It is the principal judicial arm of the United Nations. So the only judicial body in the United Nations framework is the International Court of Justice. It is situated at Peace Palace, Hague, in the Netherlands. And this Peace Palace is the building from where the earlier institution, PCIJ, Permanent Court of International Justice, used to operate. The PCIJ, in that sense, is seen as precursor to the United Nations. Precursor to the ICJ, sorry, not the United Nations, the ICJ. So ICJ is governed by a document which we had mentioned while discussing the sources of international law. And that document is Statute of the International Court of Justice. I had also mentioned that the Charter of the United Nations includes this Statute of International Court of Justice. So it is as an annexure of the Charter of the United Nations. It is not a composite part of it, but an additional document in that sense. The Statute of International Court of Justice is, in that sense, separate from the Charter of United Nations. The Statute of International Court of Justice, or ICJ in short, contains about the powers, duties, role, functioning of the judges, selection of the judges, their term, their tenure, the tenure of the offices, about the sources of international law, the jurisdiction of International Court of Justice, enforcement, etc. Now, the last chief organ of the United Nations, Trusteeship Council, is, as the name suggests, it is in the sense of a trustee. So this was created for 11 trust territories for aiding and assisting them, the 11 trust territories, in their self-governance and independence. So these were uh, the 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 decolonization era, and the states which were getting newly independent. They were to be assisted in their, so that they fully develop into a stable government, fully developed into a state in the eyes of international law. So, in with that sense, to help the newly developing, newly independent states, the states which are getting independence from their colonial past, they were assisted by one of the United Nations organ known as Trusteeship Council, where Trusteeship Council acted as a trustee of those newly established, newly independent states. But as the decolonization era ended, as most of the colonies are free, independent states now, so the role of Trusteeship Council also ended. So Trusteeship Council was suspended formally in the year 1994. So it no more exists, but it does exist in the charter provision. So if we read the charter, we'll find mention of Trusteeship Council. But in reality, its functioning has been suspended after 1994. So this is the brief organogram of the United Nations, and it's just 6 chief organs. As I said, that there are other subsidiary organs within these chief organs, and I also suggested that we must look at the detailed organogram of the United Nations with the subsidiary organs as well, which is available on the United Nations website, official website. So let us now move to different funds. So as I said that there are subsidiary organs, there are also funds and programs within these chief organs. So for example, if we talk about funds and programs, there is UNDP, which is United Nations Development Program. Within UNDP, there are 2 agencies. One is United Nations Capital Development Fund, and another is United Nations Volunteers. Then there is UNEP, or UNEP in short. It is United Nations Environment Program. Then there is United Nations Population Fund. Then there is UN Habitat, which is United Nations Human Settlements Program. Then there is UNICEF, which is United Nations Children's Fund. Then there is WFP, which is World Food Program. If we talk about research and training, these are the research and training related related organs. So one is United Nations Institute for Disarmament Research, then United Nations Institute for Training and Research, then United Nations System Staff College, and then there is United Nations University. These are examples of funds, programs, and research and training related chapters within United Nations framework. There are other entities also, like International Trade Center, or ITC. There is UNCTAD, which is United Nations Conference on Trade and Development. Then there is Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, United Nations Office for Project Services, then United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestine Refugees in the Near East, then UN Women, United Nations Entity for Gender Equality and the Empowerment of Women. So I'm sharing these examples with you to tell you the expanse of the United Nations framework. So we discussed about 6 chief organs because they're just the chief organs, but then within each chief organ, there are other entities as well. So the United Nations framework in that sense is extensive and huge. Now let us look at General Assembly and few glimpse of General Assembly which might be important for the CLAT exam. So currently, General Assembly has its annual sessions. Currently, it is the 79th session of General Assembly, which is the running year 2024 to 2025. And there is there's something when you read about General Assembly, you might come across one word, which is resolution. So United Nations General Assembly, UNGA in short, resolutions are there. Now, what is a resolution? So resolution is by the word itself resolve. So all people resolve for something. In that sense, resolution is a decision or a dissolution voted by all the members of United Nations General Assembly. So it has a sense of voted by all, but in all situations, all members do not agree on the same platform. Even if they don't agree on the same platform, it is passed by a majority, a simple majority. So there might be members who are not voting for it, but then because a resolution passes through simple majority, it is seen as the resolution by UNGA collectively, right? So in that sense, UNGA resolution refers to a decision voted by all or a collective decision of UNGA. So same goes for UNSC, that is United Nations Security Council resolution. Now, one very important question is that whether UNGA resolution is binding, right? So binding here means legally binding. So whatever UNGA resolves, whatever decision it takes, that this should happen or this should not happen. In that sense, whether UNGA's resolution is actually binding upon the parties, binding if the parties, if one or two parties, state parties are involved, and if it says that this state should not do this to that state, in that case, are the states bound by the UNGA resolution? This is our question. So UNGA resolutions are basically their characteristic is that of a recommendation, and largely they are not seen as legally binding. So therefore UNGA resolutions usually are not seen as binding. Now let us see the Security Council. So Security Council, as I said, it has 15 members, 5 permanent and 10 non-permanent. The 5 permanent members of the UNSC are China, France, Russian Federation, United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, and United States of America. So China, France, Russia, UK, and America, USA. These are the 5 permanent members of UNSC, and they're permanent because it is mentioned so in the Charter of the United Nations. We talk about non-permanent members. As I said, that they are elected on a term basis. So they are elected, and these members, non-permanent members, are elected by the General Assembly. So the non-permanent members of the Security Council are elected by the General Assembly, and they are elected for a term of 2 years. So a state which has been elected as a non-permanent member in 2024 will change in 2026, right? But given any time, there will be 10 non-permanent Security Council members besides these 5 permanent members. That makes the membership of Security Council come to 15. Now, in terms of Security Council, there is a very important thing to note. Security Council members have a special power, and that special power is veto. So what is veto? Veto is a negative vote which has the power to cancel or negate all other affirmative votes. That means that if there are 10 members who vote for something, vote for issue A to happen, for example, and there's one veto, one negative vote, then those 10 affirmative votes, the positive votes that yes, this should happen, will be negated by one veto, one negative vote, right? So it outdoes all other affirmative votes. In that sense, it is veto, a negative vote, right? And as it sounds, it is a powerful vote. So so our next question should be that who has this veto? Now, this veto is enjoyed, the veto power, the power to negate all other affirmative votes, is enjoyed by the primary, the five permanent members of the Security Council. So, China, France, Russia, UK, and USA have veto power. And why so? Because it is as per the Charter of the United Nations. So the Charter of United Nations mentions the permanent members to be these five states and also provides for veto power to be resting with these five states. So these five states have veto. That means that if the 10 non-permanent members give a positive vote, give a yes on an issue, then a veto by any of these, by either of these members can negate that the weight of the 10 affirmative votes, right? So in that sense, veto is extremely powerful. Now, all the policy decisions, all important events where there's threat to international peace and security, and there is a decision to be taken, in that there is a very significant role of veto power with these powerful states. If you understand by sheer logic that China, France, Russia, UK, USA, all these are very strong, uh, strong power wielding states in international politics who will have strong enemies and strong friends. In that sense, if any of the decision is to be taken against one's enemy or one's friend state, they may use their veto to stop that decision to be taken. So that is why veto is a very important power that the permanent Security Council members have. Now, if you try to now go to the UNSC, the website of UNSC, and look at the resolutions and try to see in what situations veto was used or who used veto, you'll find the relevance and significance of veto power, which is huge. Now, as we discussed that whether UNGA resolutions are binding or not, similarly, let us see whether UNSC resolutions are binding or not. So UNSC resolutions are, because their resolution is more of a recommendation, they may not be seen as binding, but in case of Security Council, it depends upon the text of the UNSC resolution. The text, the words that are used in the Security Council resolutions text, they hint us to the binding or non-binding nature of the UNSC resolution, right? So many times phrases like should, shall, must, these are there, or strongly condemn. So the words or phrases like this tell you the extent of binding nature of a UNSC resolution. Now let us look at passage and some questions based on that passage. Read the passage below. The resolution is, despite statements to the contrary, legally binding and creates a legally binding request for an immediate ceasefire during Ramadan and a legally binding request to immediately release all hostages. obvious elephant in the room is enforcement. Who is to enforce the Security Council resolution in the current situation? It ultimately falls to the parties of the conflict to heed the Security Council's call and to the Council itself to enforce its requests. Given the experience of the past months, this is no cause for enthusiasm. Yet, the fact that the Council could agree on the text after 5 vetoes on the matter is perhaps a shred of hope. Right? So, this passage is taken from the Israel-Palestine issue and a UNSC resolution on it. So let us see now a few questions based on this passage. So question number 1. How many discussions in the UNSC would have taken place in the above mentioned situation? So if you see the paragraph, it mentions in the last line after 5 vetoes on the matter. So 5 vetoes on the matter would mean, when I discussed veto, I said that it is powerful because one veto can outdo the rest affirmative votes. So affirmative votes, be it 5 positive votes, 9 positive votes, or 10 positive votes, or even 12 positive votes, 10 non-permanent members and 2 permanent members. Even then, if one veto is used by any of the 5 permanent members, then that decision is as good as being cancelled. In that sense, if it uses the word 5 vetoes, that means how many discussions in the UNSC would have taken place? 5 vetoes mentioned means that there would have been at least 5 rounds of discussion where one veto was used each time. So the answer would be C, 5 vetoes. Options are these. The answer would be C, 5 vetoes. Let us now see question number 2. What is a veto? A positive vote of the members of the UNGA, that is the General Assembly. B, a negative vote of the members of the UNSC, that is Security Council. C, a negative vote that can negate all affirmative votes, permanent members of UNSC, which is with the permanent members of UNSC. And D, a negative vote that can negate all affirmative votes resting with the non-permanent members of UNSC. So we know that it is a negative vote that can negate all affirmative votes, and who has veto? The permanent members have veto, not the non-permanent members, as D mentions. So therefore, C will be our correct option. Right? Let us now look at question number 3. Question number 3 reads as, which of the following have veto power? And our options are A, permanent members of UNGA, B, permanent members of UNSC, C, non-permanent members of UNSC, and D, members of the United Nations. So we know that veto power is a power that rests with the permanent members of the Security Council. That makes B the correct answer. B will be the correct answer here. Permanent members of UNSC. Let us now see question number 4. It reads as, which of the following states do not have a veto power? Our options are A, UK, B, USA, C, Germany, and D, France. So we just discussed that the 5 permanent members that have veto are China, France, Russia, UK, and US. So that means UK, US, and France are the permanent members, while Germany is not. So C will be our right answer. Germany does not have a veto power. Let us now look at question number 5. What is a resolution? And our options are A, an assurance by the United Nations, B, a promise by the United Nations, C, a decision or dissolution by all the United Nations members, D, a decision by the International Court of Justice. So we just discussed in our today's discussion that resolution is a kind of decision or dissolution that is treated as to be on behalf of all. So a decision or dissolution by all the United Nations members. In case of UNGA resolution, it will be the members of UNGA. In case of UNSC resolution, it will be the members of Security Council. So C is the correct answer. So C is the closest explanation of what a resolution is. Now, from our today's discussion, we saw the brief history of the United Nations, World War I, creation of the League of Nations through Charter of the League, Covenant of the League of Nations, and then World War II, which was seen as a failure of League of Nations moment, which had a sense prevailing that we need to relook at our international organization and maybe create a new one, and then eventually the establishment of the United Nations. Then we looked at the structure of United Nations in brief, because we only looked at the chief organs of the United Nations, the 6 principal organs of United Nations, and then few funds, programs, and research, etc. under the United Nations framework. Then we discussed about UNGA, the General Assembly, and UNSC, the Security Council, in a bit detail, where we discussed about their resolutions, their binding nature, whether they're binding or not, veto power, who has veto, etc. We also looked at certain questions based on a small passage. Now, I would highly recommend all our viewers to go to United Nations website, check out some resolutions or UNSC resolutions or UNGA resolutions, or try to see veto and instances where veto was used, because this will tell you how well you have understood our discussion today. And also this will help not only in the international law portion of CLAT, but also the current affairs portion. Because if you see previous year's question papers, last year, I believe there was a question that was asked on either last year or last year. I think it was last year, where there was a question in general knowledge, the current affairs section on Israel-Palestine issue. There also was a question on Russia-Ukraine issue. So these international law moments and places where United Nations, any of the organs are involved, be it UNGA or UNSC or ICJ, these are important not only for our legal reasoning section, but equally important for the current affairs section. That is why when I was discussing about General Assembly, I briefly mentioned that currently we are in the 79th session of General Assembly. So we are witnessing the 79th session of General Assembly. So I would recommend all of you to go to the United Nations website and check out the recent developments that have taken place in international law, or where the United Nations organs, be it chief or subsidiary organs, were involved in one or the other way. That will really help you in legal reasoning as well as current affairs. So with that, we will wrap up today's lecture, and keep learning, keep reading. Thank you.